So I think when you embrace this miracle paradox of being precise in your prayer and yet radically open to God's providence, that's when all the channels of grace-filled divine possibility are opened up to you.
Welcome, gracious gang, to the Gracious Guest Show. I'm your humble host, Mike Creavey, and I'm delighted you've stopped by today to join us for this wonderful exploration into a great topic, super important for all of us, no doubt. So before we do anything, please make sure, if you haven't done this before, to subscribe to the channel. Let's keep driving that subscription number up. It helps get this great content, these deeper considerations into all things faith and culture out there in front of more and more people, and that's really going to help, I think, hopefully, affect the culture for the better. And if you could like the video too, give that little thumbs up. That helps out as well. And share it with somebody today who will benefit from talking about miracles. Today, I'm really excited to welcome back to the show Anthony DeStefano, a really renowned author who is most recently the author of Sophia Institute Press's volume here, The Miracle Book, a simple guide to asking for the impossible. Anthony was on before to speak about his children's books, and there's many of those, but I don't want to give too much away here. We had this wonderful conversation surrounding all things miraculous and how to pray, how to really engage in a really meaningful prayer for the miraculous on a regular basis. So let me just share a little bit about Anthony's background before we jump in. Anthony DeStefano is the best-selling author of dozens of Christian books for adults and children, including A Travel Guide to Heaven, 10 Prayers God Always Says Yes To, Little Star, and The Donkey No One Could Ride. That's, I think, my daughter's favorite. Anthony has been the host of 2 television series, A Travel Guide to Life and A Travel Guide to Heaven, both broadcast on the Eternal Word Television Network, EWTN, as well as several children's programs. He has received many awards and honors from religious communities throughout the world. In 2002, he was given an honorary doctorate from the Joint Academic Commission of the National Clergy Council and the Methodist Episcopal Church for, quote, the advancement of Christian beliefs in modern culture. Anthony's appeared on many national television and radio programs, including Fox and Friends, CNN, The 700 Club, Focus on the Family Radio, and The Gracious Guest Show. So let's jump right into my interview with Anthony DeStefano about The Miracle Book. Check it out. Anthony DeStefano is back on The Gracious Guest Show. Anthony, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
It's exciting here because we just talked not too long ago here about your wonderful children's book, From Bread and Wine to Saints Divine. I've got the link down below because I like to all of these sorts of interviews feed into each other is the goal, right? Try to get people more exposure to your writings. But this was a neat opportunity because, as I mentioned to you in our last chat, I've been far more sort of familiar with your children's books, largely just because of where we're at in life in our house, and we have several of them here. They're wonderful. This was actually here, The Miracle Book, a simple guide to asking for the impossible. This was the first I guess you could say non-children's book specifically of yours that I read, and I was really delighted to do this and to be able to have this chat with you. So just to kick things off, why don't you just tell folks who aren't familiar with it at the time of this recording, it's new, it's fresh. We want people to get a copy of it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, what inspired you to write it?
Sure. Well, this isn't my first nonfiction Christian or Catholic book. This is my seventh or something like that.
Yeah.
My first was 20 years ago, now over 20 years ago, A Travel Guide to Heaven. And then children's books came after that. And it's much more joyful to write about children's books, but always my thing that I take most seriously are these adult nonfiction books. Anyway, The Miracle Book, to cut through all the chases, it's a practical, nuts and bolts type guide to praying for a miracle. The miracle might have to do with anything. You have health, your finances, family problems, feelings of anxiety, hopelessness. Even if you have no faith at all, I think there comes a point in life when everybody feels they need supernatural help. I know I have in my life. And I think so many people are suffering badly, but they don't know how to go about asking God for help other than by begging him. They beg, they plead, they negotiate, they promise that they'll do absolutely anything if only God will give them this one request. And then if God doesn't answer their prayer in the way that they want, sometimes they lose faith or they get angry at God or they sink into despair. I figured that there had to be a better way. There had to be a method of praying for a miracle that, how can I say it, guarantees not the miracle, but the best possible chance of God saying yes to us, or at least results in God answering us in a way that gives us peace and satisfies our souls. I did many years of research. I read every single book on miracles out there. There's some great books. C.S. Lewis wrote a great book on
Hmm.
miracles. Um, and this book really basically discusses what I discovered. No gimmicks here. I don't provide any magic formulas that guarantee results. The book has an imprimatur from the church. Lots of bishops have endorsed it. But what I do
Right.
offer is solid, biblically based, theologically sound principles that I believe can dramatically increase your chances of obtaining a miracle.
I think, well, that's I just finished it the other day, and I think that's just a great sort of overview of it. And there's so many different parts of it we could talk about, but I did want to ask to kind of kick things off with some of the specific things in here. You have this. We're going to talk about the paradoxes a little bit here, but the first one that I think you mentioned in there that really struck me early on is, how do we look at this question of, people will say, "Oh, miracles happen every day," but then it's sort of tempered, right, with that idea that it's very, very rare, or like people like, I've never seen anyone split the Red Sea. You'll hear things like that, basically, where there's this kind of skepticism there as well. How do you kind of balance that out with it's something God is doing,
Sure,
but they
sure.
are rare, And I think you do a
Well,
good job, by the way, of distinguishing that, if I may, just between like you mentioned a few examples where, well, this is a really amazing thing that
yeah.
God may have providentially been behind, but it wouldn't quite be a miracle. Maybe that's a good distinction too.
Sure. And I get the skepticism. I'm skeptical too. I'm a skeptical New
Yeah.
Yorker. I was, agnostic for many years. I came
Yeah.
to the faith through reading C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, and Thomas Aquinas. So I get the skepticism. People say all the time, you hear it all the time, miracles happen every day. It's such a cliche, it's such a platitude.
Right.
And yet most of us know from personal experience, including those of us more holy and faithful than me, that when they pray for a miracle, they don't usually get one. So, which statement is true here? And again, briefly, it it's what you just said. If you use the strict definition of the word miracle, which is a supernatural intervention by God in the natural order
Yeah.
of things, like the parting of the Red Sea, or an overnight disappearance of a malignant tumor without any treatment. And yes,
Right.
those miracles are very rare. But if we're talking about miracles in a more general way, broadly defined as an extraordinary answer to prayer that goes against, say, the laws of all statistics, but unfolds through perfectly natural means, through what we call secondary causes. Like, for instance, somebody who doesn't have any money, he's about to lose his home, he prays for a miracle, and then suddenly he receives the exact amount that he needs through some inheritance or some other kind of gift. Those kind of crazy, quote unquote, coincidences do happen all the time, and they're from God. They're part of his divine plan. They're answers to prayers, but they're, strictly speaking, they're not true miracles. So it's not really a contradiction to say that miracles are rare, but also frequently. It depends
Mm.
on the definition of miracle you're using, and my book, as you said, describes both.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really interesting distinction because, like, and you had down here, I wrote it in my margins early on. You're talking about this for true miracles. I love the way you said here. These interventions usually do not violate the laws of nature, but they're beyond those laws, or they supplement or intensify, basically what God's doing. And it reminded me, because sometimes I make that distinction with my the way it sometimes comes up in my high school classes. I'll try to frame it, supernatural, like you said, supernatural versus unnatural. And I'll ask the math. I said, "You guys think miracles are unnatural?" And sometimes hands will go up, and I said, "Well," I said, "at least to me, that seems to imply that God is almost like abusing nature in some way, right? Or there's like a
Right.
forceful pushing aside." But yeah, I really like the way that you explain that difference.
And we I think we even discussed a little bit of this on a previous program that we did together. God respects the laws of nature. After all, he created them. He created
Yeah.
the universe and everything in it, including the laws that govern it. So when he interferes with those laws, and performs a miracle, he doesn't usually break them blatantly by suspending the natural order. He interacts with them in a way that changes the outcome of a
Yes.
particular situation. And that sounds very complicated, but human beings do something very similar all the time. If the weather, is cold and rainy outside, we don't magically try to raise the temperature before leaving our homes. What we do is we put on a coat and a hat. to keep us
Hmm.
warm and dry. So we interfere with nature in a manner of speaking, but we don't break any meteorological laws. Well, God has much
Right.
greater power than we do, so he has much greater ability to supplement those laws.
Sure. And I love that, the idea of just this before we get into some more of the specifics here of how to go about it. Just, I thought you did a wonderful job too, just sort of encouraging the reader to do this, right? Like go and ask, for miracles. Don't be afraid to ask your heavenly Father, because I think in my case that's a lot of times, you almost feel like it's inappropriate, right? Or this idea that, oh, I that's me putting God to the test or something like that, and
You know,
I think you
it all depends on your intention. There are
right.
people out there, there are atheists out there that, they actually conduct a prayer test. They compare
Yes, yeah, I've seen right.
of people, and then they look at the results and they say, "Oh, this proves that," as if God is going to consent to be treated like a high school science experiment. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
your intention is to ask God, because look, a little kid who's afraid of going in the water or going to a new classroom or afraid of going to the doctor or the dentist, the first thing he does, he calls out to his mother or father. That's the most natural thing in the world. You go to your father or
Hmm.
your mother. So if there's something that's troubling us, of course it's okay to go to your father. That's he wants you to do that.
Yes, and the habit too that it builds. You mentioned the Vince Lombardi quote. I got a kick out of of chasing. If you chase perfection, you'll catch excellence. I think you had it there,
I
and
did.
I yeah, and I love that because that idea of why not be bold, right, in our prayer life to build that habit. And I think of and I don't remember if you mentioned this in the book or not, but King David, that terrible and sad story, of course, where the child, born from that first child born from the illicit union between David and Bathsheba, does end up dying. But David, he's doing all these things, trying to pray in the right ways, and he's
Mm.
really invoking the Lord for this to go a different way. But it's an amazing story for those who haven't read it,
It is, and it's
right?
actually
And oh, go
it's
ahead. Sorry, yeah, yeah,
no, it's funny because when he doesn't get the answer to his prayer, the first thing he does is he sits down, he has a big meal, and
yeah,
they go to him and they say, "Well, how come you broke your fast?" And he said, "Well, God said no, so
right,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
hungry."
yeah, yeah, and
But
that resolution.
he did everything he needed to do. He
Yeah.
was bold, but if God said no, he said no.
Right, right, and maybe we can get into these paradoxes here a little bit because I want to make sure it's the seven miracle paradox. Is that right?
Yes,
And maybe just tell us a little bit about them and what you mean
sure,
about that, why they're
sure.
so important.
Paradoxes are very key to understanding miracles.
Yeah.
Paradoxes are truths that seem to contradict themselves on the surface, but
Hmm.
actually they reveal a deeper kind of truth. So, for instance, everybody knows the paradox: less is more. Or the only constant is change, or the closer you
Right.
look, the less you see, or the more you give, the more you get.
Yeah.
Christianity is filled with paradoxes. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. You must die to yourself in order to
Yeah.
live. God is one, but God is three. God is fully man. Christ is fully God.
Right. Right. Right.
Anyway, these aren't just poetic ideas. They reflect the reality that, and this is the important thing, that God is an infinite being and that we're just finite creatures. We can only understand bits of God's infinite truth a little at a time. And sometimes those bits of truth look like they might contradict each other, but in reality, we just can't see the whole truth because it's too big for us. So by embracing paradoxes, sometimes we can come to a closer appreciation of the mystery and the wonder and the deeper truth of God. Now, how does that fit into miracles? Well, in the Gospels, Jesus makes some pretty powerful promises about miracles. He says
Mm.
things like, ask and it will be given to you. And if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you could move mountains. Those are bold, very clear promises. And yet we know, as we just said before, that even the most faith-filled people sometimes don't receive miracles when they pray for them. Why? What I suggest in this book is that these promises of Christ aren't so straightforward as they seem. They're really paradoxes. They involve embracing pairs of truths that seem to contradict each other, but actually are meant to be held simultaneously, which can be very hard to do. And anyway, there are 7 of these miracle paradoxes that I speak about this in this book briefly. Number 1,
Hmm.
spoken prayer versus the deep prayer of our soul. Number 2, the benefit of fear and tribulation versus the need for courage. Number
Yeah.
3, the need to have a persistent faith versus the need for a decisive faith. 4, the need for self-reliance versus the need to surrender to God. 5, the power of dying to yourself versus the power of living your best self.
Hmm.
6, the need to focus on our personal relationship with the Lord, which is so important to our Protestant brothers and sisters and to Catholics, versus the need to be part of a community of believers. And the final miracle paradox, the importance of precision, specificity in our prayer versus the need for radical openness to the will of God. Those are the
Yeah.
paradoxes I go over in the book chapter by chapter.
Well, there's two I wanted to focus on. Actually, I'm changing the order of this a little bit. Just I felt the prompting of the Holy Spirit, I think. But that last one you mentioned, with precision versus openness, and I don't want to give too much away in the book, but you mentioned in your own life, sort of retroactively seeing that, here you are asking God, right, for these,
Yeah,
specific things. And I mean, share as much of that as you
sure,
want, but
sure.
but to ask God for these specific sort of pathways, these specific careers, these specific abilities, whatever the case may be,
Yes.
and then gradually over time seeing that He was answering the deeper good desire that was leading you to ask for those things, but you didn't know that you were asking for the wrong manifestation of it or something like that. Might be a way of
Yeah,
putting it. I
yeah.
thought that was really enlightening. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It took me only 30 years to learn it.
It took
It
a
only
while.
took
Yeah.
a few decades. Well, first of all, I'd be happy to talk about myself personally.
Yeah.
But first of all, it's important to understand that there's genuine value in being specific in our prayers. Precision in prayer shows God that we trust Him with the intimate details of our lives, just like we would a close friend. So, if the goal of a Christian is to have a personal relationship with the Lord, we have to share those kind of details. That's what relationship is about, sharing. Also, when we make specific requests, we're acknowledging that God isn't just the Lord of the church we belong to. He's the Lord of our families, the Lord of our
Mhm.
finances, the Lord of our vacations, the Lord of our bedrooms. And finally, when we're precise in our prayers, we're acknowledging the fact that God doesn't just view our lives from a distance, like the old song says, but that He's right here, right now. He's deeply involved. He cares about everything we care about. But, very big but, at the same time, that we're being precise, we simultaneously have to be open to God's will. And the reason is that we don't always know what's truly best for us, even when we're praying with great sincerity. In fact, many times, and this is what I'll speak about for a second, we
Yeah.
don't even really know what we want. Our desires may seem real to us, but they're always wrapped up in our emotions, and they're influenced by fear and desire and pride.
Amen.
Openness to God's will shows that we trust God because He sees the big picture. He can see the future, and he can see what's best for us, not just in the moment, but forever. So I think when you embrace this miracle paradox of being precise in your prayer and yet radically open to God's providence, that's when all the channels of grace-filled divine possibility are opened up to you. Because of your willingness to give God the maximum amount of faith and surrender. And that's exactly the way Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. And He said, not my will, but your will. And that's the way He was able to save
Right.
humanity and open up the gates of heaven. In my case, when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a surgeon. And I prayed for years. I tried very hard to do that. I would have become a surgeon too. A couple of little things got in the way that I didn't mention in the book. Little things like organic chemistry and integral calculus and things like that. And
Hmm.
after that, I wanted to go into the world of politics, and I wanted to help the people I represented.
Yeah.
And I failed at that. But and I didn't know. I thought God had refused me, and I had a lot of angst and frustration with God, and it contributed to me being an agnostic. But
Yeah.
sometime in my late 20s, I started becoming committed to my faith. I read a book by C.S. Lewis called The Screw Tape Letters, and
Hmm.
it really made a big impression on me. I thought to myself, well, I have this writing talent, and maybe if I could write books like C.S. Lewis, not anywhere as good, of course, then maybe I could still accomplish all the goals I had. Maybe what I really wanted to be, but was too I was unable to articulate it, was I wanted to be a healer. God was calling me to
Yes.
be a healer, but not with surgery or with political legislation, but with writing. So
Yes.
I think that if I had been open all those years instead of just trying to force God to give me the solution I wanted to my desire, I would have had a lot less frustration. And, I would have been open to receive. I should have said to myself, God hasn't said no. He said, he said, listen, wait until you see what I've got planned for you. You're
Mm-hmm.
gonna write 30 books, children's books. You're gonna be on, the Gracious Guest podcast. You're gonna be so happy, and
Yeah.
everything's gonna be more. And it's been more fulfilling than it could have ever been any other way. So I'm sorry for being so long.
No, that's exactly what I'm getting, because it's I think that ties into that other paradox so well too, with the idea of that balance of being simultaneously self-reliant and yet open to this idea of surrender. And
Yes.
that's I did want to ask you about that next. So how did you already shared a little bit about what that looked like for you. Feel free to share a little more there, or just
Sure.
other insights from the book, a little whet people's appetite a little bit for that aspect of it.
Sure. Well, this is one of the great paradoxes of the spiritual life. On the one hand, you're expected to act. You got to go to the doctor when you're sick. You have to call your lawyer when you're in legal trouble. You have to fight injustice whenever you see it. You have to use all your talents to solve all your problems. You can't sit back and do nothing. You have to fulfill your obligations in life. You can't be completely passive and expect God to do all the work, because he's not. But at the same time, after you've done all you can do, you got to let it go. You got to
Mm-hmm.
relinquish. This is what people have a problem with, relinquishing. You have to trust that
Yes.
whatever the outcome you're working for and you're praying for, it's ultimately in God's hands. You have to try to be at peace, even if you're afraid that things might not turn out for you the way you hope. In other words, you have to do what Jesus said in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not my will, but your will. So it's not like with all paradoxes. It's not an either or situation. It's both. Like a sailor who trims the sails of his boat, but at the same time letting the wind do the work. We're called to act boldly while at the same time resting completely in the Lord. So yes, you have to be self-reliant.
Yes.
You have to use all your gifts and resources. But you can't ever make the mistake of thinking that you're in ultimate control. You have to do what St. Augustine said. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Pray as though everything depended on God. Work as though everything depended on
Yes.
you. That's the balance in the Christian life. That's the sweet spot, I think, when it comes to achieving miracles.
Yeah. Well, and this, it's, I think, a good example of, it working out a way that you didn't anticipate, where you can then, again, retroactively, maybe sometimes, I think it's more often than not retroactive for us, right? Because we're the ones living in time, and God's saying, I told you, like, I told you it would, play out. So I don't want to give away. There's one in particular I'm thinking of, that you might know which one I'm thinking of, but it was very personal, and I really personally want to, I think, let
Oh, wow.
people discover that in the book. But I'll share just very briefly. What it reminded me in some ways of was my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who passed away, many years ago now. But he had Alzheimer's. He had Alzheimer's very badly, for many years. It was we studied it, as a family, of course, as we're all going through it, and just based on the research I did back then, how they have the tiers that you go through, where you kind of plateau for a bit and then you drop and you're at that level. And as he's going through that, just anecdotally, the family's looking at the research we're doing, and it was like he was so far beyond the average number of years for each one of those. Like, it was just so terrible, and it went on forever. And to make a long story short, we're praying the whole time, like, Lord, heal him or take him home. Like, this is just, and these prayers were part of our life for so long. And my dad especially had to take care of him. He was his caretaker for many years. And all I'll say is, just looking back on it, the healing that came to the two of them, especially like my dad, things that maybe had needed to be said, needed to be forgiven, decades worth of things that happen, right, in families.
Yes.
That you have to think, it never would have happened if God hadn't allowed my dad to be put in this incredibly impossible, difficult situation that would require him to go to that level, right, of forgiveness, right? And if my grandfather had just sort of perfect health and slowly just, died in his sleep, I have to think that the opportunities that both of them had, to sort of grow closer to each other and to potentially forgive, all these things just wouldn't have been there. And so that's, so you shared something a little similar, where it was just looking back on it and like seeing, well, God gave me so much more than I was asking for,
My father,
in a way I didn't expect.
he died of died of a blood disease about 12, 13 years ago. And the same thing, the doctors gave him a very short time to live, about a year. And, my family, I have my brother's a priest, and I was working with
Right.
the church at the time. And, we said novenas. We said, oh my,
Yeah.
we did every single thing, daily masses, rosaries. We just wanted a little bit more time with him. We asked for a
Hmm.
little bit more time, but he died in exactly the time that the doctor said. But what I discovered, like you said, retroactively, was that during that time of his illness, I was over that house every single day.
Hmm.
Before he was sick, I wasn't over there every day. I was over there
Right.
every few weeks. I was
Yeah.
busy with my own life. I was getting things
Right.
done. In that year that he was sick, I was there every single day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. I took him to his doctor's appointments. And, if you add up all the time that I spent with him during that 1 year, and you space it out over a few weeks, like I would have done when he wasn't sick, it would have added up to something
Right.
like 17 or 18 years that I had with my father. And during that time, as you just said about that beautiful story, we had all kinds of breakthroughs in the relationship, age old animosities, not just
Yeah.
between me and him, but with him and my mom and the family, all of that stuff. God resolved all of that stuff. And if you look at things from God's perspective, which is always, he looks at things from heaven. Heaven,
Hmm.
heaven is for eternity. This life
Right.
we have here is a little drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
Heaven is forever. So no matter how, even if you live to 150 years here, it's nothing.
Right.
So it's nothing compared to eternity, to a morning in eternity. So what God did from God's perspective was he took care of all those unresolved problems. He brought us all closer together, and he did answer our prayers. He
Yeah.
just answered it in a much more meaningful, deep way.
Well, and I think that's such a, again, a perfect, sort of dovetail here over to my next question I had for you, because you mentioned this idea of the age of miracles.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm fascinated with that. I want to get your thoughts on it a little bit more, because when you said God looking at this from heaven's perspective, wanting us to be with him forever, something I've really tried to convey to my students, especially when we get into eschatology, is something that really was a game changer for me when I realized it's not just about you're here and almost like this is the main life, and then you die and just sort of well, then there's the afterlife. But starting to see it more and more as, no, like the whole point of us being here at all is to hopefully get to a kind of life, a kind of living, a kind of being that can withstand heaven for all eternity, right? And if you don't learn here, right, how to be like they are there, so to speak, it's you
It's
won't be able to experience the fullness of heaven. So
It's a very deep
yeah.
question, and Jesus Christ spoke about the kingdom of heaven all the time, and it was very strange when you read those gospel passages, because he speaks of it as a time in the future, but also as a time of the present. So it's
Right.
sort of like
Yeah.
it's something that's happening in the present that has a trajectory in the future.
Yes.
And it's what you just said. What we're doing is we're expanding. It's not just a test to get to heaven. We are working right now on expanding our souls so that our souls can be filled with all the happiness that God has to give us. The
Yeah.
famous example of Saint Therese used about, how could all the souls in heaven be equally happy? The great saints compared to the people like me who just get there by, the
I
skin
just
of
want to get in the door. Yeah.
right. Well, and their sister showed her, 3 different glasses, a little shot glass,
Yes.
a
Yes.
regular glass, and then a tall glass. And she filled them all up with water. And she said to little Therese, all these 3 glasses, are they all filled?
Yeah.
And Therese
Yeah.
said, "Yeah, they're all equally filled, but which can hold the most water?" Well, this big one here. Well,
Yeah.
that's what we're doing on this earth right now. We're like the glass blowers. We're blowing out the glass, trying to get to be big glasses. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll be equally happy in heaven once we get there, but we're only going to be able to hold as much as we're able to hold, and that's based on the grace
Yeah.
that we have in this life.
Would that I love him enough to bring him an ocean base, and instead of a thimble, right?
Right,
Like he'll,
simple.
right.
That's better. I
That's
said a shot glass.
that's he'll fill it. But
Then,
yeah, that's that's
but
so do you
in the
see
new age of
oh, go
miracles,
ahead. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's because I was going to ask, like, if there's actual, I mean, not to give too much away, maybe, but particular things you see, signs you see, moments in our world that might be indicating that too.
well, the first age of miracles occurred 2,000 years ago, right during the apostolic age and the time of the
Sure.
church fathers. And back then, bona fide miracles weren't just the exception to the rule. They happen all the time. They were a constant
Yeah.
part of life. Not only Jesus, but the apostles, many of the early Christian leaders, they healed the sick, they raised the dead, they cast out demons. That's a normal part of their ministry. That's
Right.
why the church was able to grow so rapidly, even in the face of terrible persecution. Now, 2,000 years later, the reason why I think we're on the verge of a new age of miracles, it's for very similar reasons. Christianity is being persecuted all over the globe. In some places, very, very deadly persecution. In the West, it's being persecuted not just, well, not with lions and gladiators, but with ridicule and censorship and legal
Yeah.
threats,
Litigation, right?
cancel culture, and intense social pressure and propaganda from the media and
Yeah.
Hollywood and the academic world and the political world. We all know that the secular culture is blatantly, openly hostile to basic Christian teaching. We're bigoted, we're outdated, we're hateful. That's how they label us. And
Hmm.
these attacks on core Christian values like marriage, family, on life
Right.
itself, of course, they are
Yeah.
relentless. And this in this toxic environment, my fear is that words alone may not be enough to bring people back to the faith. We need something more, something miraculous. And as Pope Benedict the 16th noted when he created the Pontifical Council for promoting the new evangelization,
Hmm.
we have to preach the gospel to a world that has forgotten it. And to me, it makes perfect
Yeah.
sense that God would accompany a new, renewed effort at evangelization during this time of persecution and oppression with a fresh wave of miracles. And that's why it goes in what you were saying before about being bold. I say in this book, now's the time not to ask for one miracle. Now's the time to ask for 20 miracles. Take
Hmm.
advantage of this time of persecution, this time of purification, and let's get some miracles so that we can use them to show the world once again that God is real, that He's powerful, that He's calling the whole world to conversion. It's just, to me, it's just common sense.
Yeah. Well, and that's the last sort of official question I had for you that leads right to that. It's almost like we planned this. No, but that is a great way to ask the question for anyone watching this. Who, I mean, of course, we'll tell them to get the book. That's the first thing I'll say. But for those who are kind of at wit's end, they might feel that under the rope, proverbially, they don't know where to turn. They really think they need this, right? I need this miracle from the Lord today. What do you think the most important thing is for them to do? Like you said, to not a magic bullet. Like if you say, like, because that's where
Right.
you get like, okay, what's the magic spell I have to say to get what I want? That's what a lot of people think. No, it's not that.
Um,
But how do they position themselves, to be on the receiving end of whatever the Lord's trying to do for them?
Well, that's a good question. If somebody out there is watching, this interview right now, and they desperately need a miracle, the first thing I think you have to remember is that you're not alone. God sees you. He knows exactly
Yeah.
what you're going through. He's known from all eternity that you would need a miracle at this moment, and that you would be tuning into your program, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah.
And keeping that in mind, I would say there are 5 or 6 things that you should do. Number one, first, whenever you're experiencing anxiety, you got to take a breath and try to be calm. As the Psalms say, be still and know that I am God. Try to put your emotions to the side just for a second. Okay, don't feel faith. We all know that the most important biblical requirement for a miracle is faith. Don't try to
Hmm.
feel faith. Don't try to feel certitude. Think
Mm-hmm.
faith. Don't get all worked up emotionally. Make a decisive act of the will to trust God that He has the power and the desire to help you. And just, even if you're anxious, just keep saying with Saint Faustina, Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you. Second, this is a difficult one, and it's why this prayer is not superstitious. You've got to make the definitive decision to be sorry for all your sins and resolve to become a better, holier a person. In
Yeah.
the Bible, Jesus used miracles to turn sinners around. He was concerned with the inner person more than the outer person. The miracles were always a sign of some transformation of the person's soul. So if you need a miracle, you got to make a real effort to clear the decks, so to speak, spiritually. You got
Hmm.
to ask God's forgiveness, be willing to change. That's what God wants most from you. So give it to Him. You know.
Yeah.
Um, Third, you got to get the community of believers on your side. Make use of
Yeah.
the power of intercessory prayer. Don't keep your need for a miracle a secret. Tell
Yeah.
as many people as you can. Go on social media, ask your friends. You don't have to tell everybody your specific problem. Just ask them to pray for your special intention. God will know what that intention is when they pray.
Yeah.
And don't forget to get the angels and saints.
I was going to say, not just the church militant, but how about that church triumphant too, while we're at it?
They're close to God. They're right there
Yeah.
with God. Their prayers are powerful, especially
Yeah.
Our Lady. For goodness sake, get Our Lady involved. Remember, Mary isn't just the mother of God. She's the mother of miracles. So ask for her help. Next, probably most importantly, you have to be radically open to God's will. We just talked about that before. Tell him what you want, be clear and precise, but then echo the words of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not my will, but yours be done. That's the model for all miracle prayers. That kind of surrender isn't weakness, it's spiritual power. It gives God the permission to act in an unexpected and incredibly miraculous way. And he's always going to do that. He's going to act in an unexpected way. He's much brighter than we are, and the solutions he comes up with are way smarter than the solutions we come up with. Finally, I would say this: when you pray for your specific miracle intention, this is something everybody forgets. Be sure to pray for God's greater glory too. That's so important. In other words, ask God, if he's going to grant you a miracle, ask him to use the miracle to deepen the faith of the people around you, to make them realize that God is responsible for the great blessing you're receiving, not you.
Right.
So when you see God's glory,
or like the universe, right? You'll hear that people say, like, just ask the universe. Like, no, I'm not asking the universe for anything.
Karma. You got this. Use this. If God's going to give you a miracle, he wants you to make sure that you're going to use it to talk about him, so that he can come into the lives of other people, not because he needs it out of pride. He wants to help other people. So when you acknowledge that your request isn't solely about fulfilling selfish desires, but about spreading faith in God to everyone, that reflects not only a humble disposition, but a mature faith, and I think one that's more worthy and deserving of a miracle. So that's a whole book in a brief
in a nutshell. Well, that's wonderful, Anthony. We wish you the best with this book. I really hope you get a good turnout and get some good conversation with folks too. I'm sure you'll hear back about it, and we'll have to have you back on too in the future.
I just want people who read the book to get their miracle or to get a powerful answer to prayer. I'm not praying for the book's success at all. I just want the people who read it to get some powerful answer to their prayer. I promise you that's my only prayer.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. God bless you and take care.
Thank you.
And if you want to learn more, you're going to have to get the book. So definitely check out the links below. I can't recommend it enough. Like I was saying earlier, it's a great little text. Get it. Give it as a copy to someone, else who's maybe going through a tough time or just wants to know more about the topic. Wonderful opportunity to evangelize, as always. So thank you so much for stopping by the Gracious Guest Show today. I'm Mike Creavey. Can't wait to have you back next time. But until then, don't forget to wonder. Take care.